Stock Radio Newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
Good day with your major newscast. I am Jessica Daw. First with the highlights. The Guyana Public Service Union is calling on public servants to stage industrial action against the 7% wage and salary increase that was announced yesterday. The Guyana Teachers Union is also condemning the 7% wage and salary increase, which is retroactive to January 2021. Former Bishop High School teacher accused of allegedly engaging in sexual activities with an underage schoolgirl wins a $5 million lawsuit against former culture advisor Ruel Johnson for defamation of character. Advisor on Borders Carl Greenidge clarifies that his letter to President Ali addresses inappropriate ministerial communication about the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy. In the region, local religious organizations in Barbados have strongly condemned humanists in Barbados for urging the government to remove all references to God in local law books and scrap prayer in public schools. The Bahamas government is putting a freeze on hiring in the public service, as it says presently there are workers who are being paid but are at home without work to do. And internationally, days after Austria imposed a lockdown on the unvaccinated, it has announced a full national COVID-19 lockdown starting on Monday. The details of these stories and more in just a moment.
Advertise with us on News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM for best coverage on programs on motivation, beauty and health, parenting and relationships, knowing your rights, and a variety of enlightening content, and get value for your money. Call our helpful staff today on 223-1056 or 223-1041 today.
Now for the news in detail. The Guyana Public Service Union, GPSU, on Thursday called on public servants to start industrial action against the 7% pay increase that the government announced. The GPSU is calling on public servants to work to rule. Work to rule leads to less if do exactly what is stipulated in their contracts and provides little or no leeway for them to be disciplined. The union also called for a unity among workers in and out of the public service to make whatever sacrifice is necessary to register their disgust at how the government has been treating them. The GPSU lambasted the government for handing out a 7% increase, in apparent reference to the several cash transfers since returning to office in August 2020. That union accused the government of spending public resources on political gimmicks. The Guyana Teachers Union is also condemning the 7% wage and salary increase, which is retroactive to January 2021. That union calculates that the pay increase will actually amount to 3.5% for 2021. The GTU says the announced salary increase will further increase every item consumers need to get by in December 2021 and beyond. The Teachers Union is recommending that the government does not tax the 7% increase for this year, pay outstanding clothing allowances for teachers for this year in December. According to the GTU, the government should also resolve the outstanding debunching payment to teachers for December 2021 and resolve the difference in salary for teachers who were employed during the period 2016 to 2020. The GTU is also demanding another 200 million Guyana dollars to the amount set aside for frontline workers so that teachers who have been in the forefront can be compensated like medical personnel. Both the GPSU and the GTUC have restated the need for the government to negotiate salary and non-salary matters. Former Bishop High School teacher accused of allegedly having engaged in sexual activities with an underage girl has successfully sued and won a judgment against former cultural advisor Ruel Johnson for defamation of character. In a written unsigned judgment seen by News Talk Radio 103.1 FM, Justice Navindra Singh awarded the claimant for damages, which includes an assessment of aggravated damages. The written judgment states that in the circumstances, the court awards the sum of $5 million as damages for defamation to the claimant against the defendant. The court awards interest on the said award at the rate of 6% per annually from March 5, 2019 to November 19, 2021, and 4% per annually until the sum is fully paid. The court also awards the sum of $1 million as costs to the claimant against the defendant, which is set to be paid on or before January the 7th, 2022. Mr. Sion Jackson was represented by attorneys at law Nigel Hughes and Savannah Barnwell. Attorney Ganesh Hira represented Ruel Johnson. Guyana's agent on the border case with Venezuela at the World Court, Carl Greenidge, has defended a leaked letter. He says that his letter to President Irfaan Ali back in April had addressed ministerial behavior. Foreign Affairs Minister Hugh Todd and Governance Affairs Minister Gil Teixeira had been in that meeting. Mr. Greenidge told a media conference on Thursday that he had never intended to sow discord but to address communication issues.
In fact, the letter, although pointing to likely adverse implications of ministerial decisions, was primarily about inappropriate ministerial behavior and language, as well as about the consequences of discussing a particular topic in public. And in public, I mean with TV coverage at that stage in time. Again, I repeat, the issue, the letter was about some things that were very specific, had nothing to do with many of the topics I see mentioned in the press, both the social media and in the press. And that really is very disappointing.
Mr. Greenidge questioned the motive for leaking the letter by him to President Irfaan Ali, although the matter had been resolved 7 months ago. Mr. Greenidge classified the leak of the document as reckless, reprehensible, and naive. The advisor on borders says he is committed to continuing the process on the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy.
Foreign Affairs press release indicates that a common understanding exists within the team. And this is as it should be, because since 2016, there has been an agreement between opposition and government as to the virtue of their full joint participation in the deliberations in question and the court hearings. My critical role in this exercise has been forging that understanding, and I intend, in the national interest, to continue along that path in a non-partisan way.
Guyana is expected to complete its memorial for submission to the International Court of Justice March 7, 2022, Venezuela is scheduled to submit 1 year later. The Foreign Affairs Ministry's claim that certain experienced officers at the ministry were excluded from working on the team of the Guyana-Venezuela border court case was yesterday rejected by border advisor Carl Greenidge. Mr. Greenidge says the release of incorrect statements were made because those persons were not familiar with the issue and did not conduct research. He says both officers have worked and continue to work with the team that is fighting Guyana's legal battle at the World Court.
But both Ms. Trishala Prasad and Ms. Donnet Street were and always have been integrally involved prior to Minister Todd's appointment, and they've continued to be involved. In addition, and as to be expected, the legal and frontiers departments of the ministry have traditionally been integral parts of the process, regardless of government changes, which makes much of the material on show in the press and even in the press release rather astonishing.
The ministry's release stated that certain key officers at the ministry who have knowledge of the border issues and know the boundaries had been excluded from the process by the previous coalition administration. Mr. Greenidge says it was established by both the opposition and government that there will be continuity of the team, and that agreement is still in place. The feasibility study for the construction of the bridge over the Quarantine River will be completed shortly. Star News reports that head of the Bridges Department at Surinam's Ministry of Public Works, Farazia Atawala, says that a tender will be issued next month to allow engineering firms to submit designs for the bridge. The disclosure was made after an orientation visit to Guyana earlier this week. A delegation consisting of representatives of the Ministry of Public Works, OW, a consultancy company, and contractors was in Guyana for talks about the construction of the bridge over the Quarantine River. Guyana and Ikeri were visited to see the places where the bridge will be built. The engineering firms were given the opportunity to become familiar with the sites and ask questions that will help them to design the bridge. The Suriname government says the more than a 5-kilometer journey will include a connection to Long Island in the Quarantine River. Both countries hope to start construction of the bridge by next year's end. The government is open to purchasing the anti-COVID pill when it becomes available and is approved. Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony, during his COVID-19 update on Thursday, said the approved drug will be important in Guyana to treat the viral disease.
It is something that we are looking at. As I've said before, we have reviewed the efficacy of the medication. It seemed to be working quite well, and therefore, as soon as it's made available and it's licensed, then that's something that we'll want to look at. And it's certainly a medication that we'll want to add to the meds that we already have been using to treat COVID-19.
Manufacturer of one such pill, Pfizer, has signed an agreement with the World Health Organization Patent Department to allow other companies around the world to be licensed to produce the pill. The arrangement will allow for more access to the pills easily and cheaper for the treatment of COVID-19. The pill is said to be more than 90% effective in early trials, which were halted to begin production because of its effectiveness. The Ministry of Health says there is a slight increase in active and new COVID cases in the last 24 hours. The COVID death toll is now 968, with the passing of 3 unvaccinated persons. The Health Minister, Dr. Frank Anthony, during Thursday's COVID update.
So over the last 24 hours, we were able to detect 55 new cases. And currently we have 2,412 active cases. The places that we are paying keen attention to would be Region 3, 4, 6, and 10.
The health minister says there is increased hospitalization as a result in both serious and moderate cases.
Of these cases, of the 2,049 cases, we currently have 64 persons in hospital, with 37 of them at the Ocean View Hospital, and 16 of those persons are in the ICU. We currently have, of the 64 persons that we have in hospital, 44 of them require some amount of oxygen. So across the different hospitals where they're located, they're receiving the oxygen.
The health minister says as of Wednesday, the ministry fully vaccinated 266,127 adults and 19,758 children. He says the number of adults partially vaccinated total 394,094, and children partially vaccinated total 28,551. Now for the news in the region. Local religious organizations in Barbados have strongly condemned Humanists Barbados for urging the government to remove all references to God in local law books and scrap prayer in public schools. The bold assertions by the group's president, Marshall Farley, to also eliminate blasphemy as an offense have raised the ire of the faith-based community as the various entities took turns in rebuffing the declaration of the human rights body. The Muslim community strongly disagreed with the suggestions made by Humanists Barbados and defended the status quo. The Barbados Evangelical Association, BEA, offered a swift response, arguing that any attempt to dialogue with the humanists would be a waste of time, since both sides begin their respective positions from 2 opposing premises. Outspoken founder of Mount Zion's Missions, Incorporated Barbados, Reverend Dr. Lucille Beard, has appealed to the Christian community to boycott the radio call-in show Down to Brass Tacks when political scientist Peter Wickham is moderating. She also suggested that the humanists are going to negatively impact the vulnerable youth in the most destructive manner. Reverend Beard says to remove God from the national anthem and people's lives is to court destruction. State Public Service Minister of the Bahamas, Pia Glover-Roll, disclosed that the government is putting a freeze on hiring in the public service temporarily. According to the Tribune, the minister says there are cases in the country where people were engaged for jobs on election day, where about 40 workers were hired and are being paid but remain at home because there is no work for them to do. Minister Pia Glover says those instances and other issues prompted the government to put a freeze on hiring in the public service, which will remain in place until an audit of the service is completed in 2022. She says it is also likely that some of the hired workers will be made redundant. Minister Glover says the government has a program called the 52-week program that is the Public Service Professional Engagement Program that will resume in the middle of 2022. She says that through the program, cohorts of 52 weeks will start, where after 52 weeks, the cohorts of workers will be confirmed in the service should they have no adverse reports. The minister says the hiring process, which is the stream used to bring persons into the public service generally, will resume as soon as an audit is done by June-July of 2022. And lastly, in the region, Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, Ayanna Webster Roy, and Tobago House of Assembly, THA Chief Secretary Ansel Dennis, says a $50 million allocation to the Assembly announced in Tobago on Wednesday is government carrying out its policies and not an election gimmick to help the PNM win the December 6 THA elections. According to Newsday TNT, the government officials made the comments on Thursday while dismissing claims from other quarters that the release of the allocation was linked with the elections. At the post-executive news conference in Scarborough on Wednesday, Dennis announced the Assembly has received a further $50 million from the government to assist hoteliers and displaced workers in the accommodation sector still reeling from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Finance Minister Colm Embert announced the allocation of the THA when he presented the 2022 budget in the House of Representatives on October 4. Webster Roy, who is also Tobago East Member of Parliament, says there was nothing unusual about the timing of the release of the $50 million to the Assembly. The budget was recently passed, and usually around this time, ministries and departments would start receiving releases on their allocation. Webster Roy says the $50 million released to the THA to assist hoteliers and others affected by the COVID-19 pandemic is not an election gimmick or an attempt to woo the Tobago electorate. She says it is simply the government carrying out its policies in and out of election season, adding that the PNM has always prioritized national advancement and citizens' socio-economic well-being. Webster Roy dismissed claims by UNC Deputy Leader Gerlene John that the PNM had ruined Tobago's economy and entrepreneurial spirit over time. And here now is your international news from the BBC.
Hello, I'm David Harper with the BBC News. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has backed down over controversial agricultural reforms, saying he'll repeal 3 laws that have sparked a year of protests by hundreds of thousands of farmers. They'd complained that the changes, which opened farming up to the private sector, would destroy their livelihoods. Mr Modi made the rare U-turn in an address to the nation. Our correspondent Rajini Vaidyanathan was watching.
He admitted he'd failed to explain the benefits of the laws to the farmers. He says they're going to be repealed in the next month. And it is a bit of an about turn. Now, some people say that might be because we've got key elections coming up in the states of Punjab and Uttar Pradesh, of which farmers are a large constituent. So it could be political calculations that this all came down to in the end.
In the past hour, Austria has announced it's reintroducing a national lockdown as it tries to combat its worst levels of coronavirus infection since the pandemic began. The measure will start on Monday and last a maximum of 20 days. Vaccinations will also be compulsory from next February. 3/4 of adults in Austria have been fully jabbed. The Japanese government has approved a record COVID stimulus package of almost $500 billion, including direct cash handouts to households. It includes one-off payments for families with children under 18. The wages of nurses and care workers will also rise. The outcry over the whereabouts of the Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai has continued, with the Women's Tennis Association saying it's prepared to pull its tournament out of China unless it receives proof that she's safe. Here's Celia Hatton.
Like many others who've criticised or challenged China's communist leadership in recent years, Peng Shuai has disappeared. 2 weeks ago, she made a bombshell allegation accusing China's former vice premier, Zhang Gaoli, of sexual assault. Now, the head of the Women's Tennis Association, Steve Simon, says the situation is threatening its relationship with China. He said women needed to be respected and not censored. An email attributed to Ms. Peng and addressed to Mr. Simon that was released by China's state media earlier this week has been widely dismissed.
South Africa's state-owned electricity provider Eskom says it has found clear evidence of sabotage at one of its power plants. The company's chief executive says a pylon was brought down. Andrew Harding has this report from Johannesburg.
For years, South Africans have been forced to endure frequent power cuts, usually blamed on chronic mismanagement and on thieves stealing precious equipment. But the government is now trying to clean up Eskom and is also fighting a bitter factional battle within the governing ANC. It's not clear yet who's behind the sabotage, but fingers are likely to be pointed at corrupt officials and at politicians who have a personal interest in wanting to see Eskom and South Africa's government fail.
World News from the BBC. The International Labour Organization says the authorities in Qatar are not adequately investigating and reporting the deaths of workers, in particular migrants in the building industry. The ILO says data from government-run trauma centres and ambulances last year showed that 50 workers died and more than 500 were badly injured. Qatar has drawn frequent criticism for its treatment of foreign labourers as it prepares to host next year's Football World Cup. Poland's border guard agency says Belarusian forces tried to help migrants force their way across the border, even after a makeshift camp was cleared. A spokeswoman said Belarus brought migrants in trucks to an area where there was an attempted mass crossing. On Thursday, the Belarusian authorities took migrants who'd been at the border to a warehouse for shelter. The Australian Test cricket captain Tim Paine has resigned after learning that an investigation into an incident 4 years ago was being made public. Paine had sent lewd text messages and an inappropriate photo to a female colleague. At the time, the sport's governing body in Australia cleared him of any breach of the code of conduct. But with weeks to go before the Ashes series against England, Paine said he deeply regretted his actions and would step down.
I've been blessed with a wonderful, loving and supportive family, and it breaks my heart to know how much that I've let them down. They have always stood by me, been my most loyal fans, and I'm indebted to them for their support.
The British government says it will support legislation to raise the legal age at which people in England and Wales can marry to 18. At the moment, with parental permission, the age is 16. Campaigners say the bill would help children at risk of being forced or coerced into marriage. But some in the traveller and Roma communities say there hasn't been enough consultation. The bill doesn't apply to Northern Ireland or to Scotland. That's the latest BBC News.
And that was your international news. Here now is a recap of the highlights. The Guyana Public Service Union is calling on public servants to stage industrial action against the 7% wage and salary increase that was announced yesterday. The Guyana Teachers Union is also condemning the 7% wage and salary increase, which is retroactive to January 2021. Former Bishop High School teacher accused of allegedly engaging in sexual activities with an underage schoolgirl wins a $5 million lawsuit against former culture advisor Ruel Johnson for defamation of character. Advisor on Borders Carl Greenidge clarifies that his letter to President Ali addresses inappropriate ministerial communication about the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy. In the region, local religious organizations in Barbados have strongly condemned the humanists in Barbados for urging the government to remove all references to God in local law books and scrap prayer in public schools. The Bahamas government is putting a freeze on hiring in the public service, as it says presently they are workers who are being paid but are at home without work to do. And internationally, days after Austria imposed a lockdown on the unvaccinated, it has announced a full national COVID-19 lockdown starting on Monday. And that was your major newscast. I'm Jessica Daw.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.